welcome everyone to part 3 in our plotting series. I'm Valerie Beal, and I'm here with Tracy Catherine TK Sheffield, another author here in Wisconsin. And today we are going to talk about plotting versus pantsing, meaning, if you haven't heard that, writing by the seat of your pants. So that's always, I stumble over that. Like I always like, what are people saying?
Yes.
Pantsing.
It's a term that writers get it. Everybody else kind of looks at you like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, there's like a giant question mark over their head. I'm not sure what this person just said. Yeah, exactly.
And when I write pantser, like if I'm writing a blog post, but pantser always gets auto corrected, right? Even the writing program doesn't understand that word.
No, it doesn't. It's always like this word is misspelled constantly. Yes. Like add to dictionary, to dictionary. So we, Tracy and I have been talking about this concept a little bit. We realized that this is the perfect topic for this part 3. We need to actually cover this before we move on to other parts of this series on plotting. And it's interesting because we each have a little different take on it. And I have to say, to kick this discussion off, I was a firm pantser. I was just never going to plot. I thought I was going to lose that creative spark if I spent too much time plotting. So for my initial, writing work, my first novel and even my second one, I tended to know, you have that beginning, what you're starting. I knew where I was going to end up. And then I just trusted the creative process. Since then, that approach brought me some troubles, shall we say. When I got to book 3 in the series that I have that's out, I realized I had so many different threads and different subplots and different things that happen when you write a series that I needed to spend more time putting those notes down, listing things out, what's going to happen when. I'm not sure that I am to the point of I know some people will be crazy outliners and every little thing is noted. I don't do that, but I found that guidance helped me write faster and actually prevented me from having to edit quite so much at the end where, we were talking a little bit about that messy middle and that sort of fun that happens to us authors when we lose our way sort of in that process.
Well, I understand your position and I agree with it. I may have, just a different perspective. But first I want to say thank you for having me. I love blogging and contributing to your wonderful website and your blog. It is so info-packed. I don't know how you have time to do that writers forum that you do every month, but that is a just treasure load of information for writers. And that's one of the things that I like to do as a writer. I write, books for readers who want to laugh and escape. Cozy mysteries, romantic comedies. And the other thing that I'd like to add on to that is to assist other writers, give them the insight that I have gained, you have gained through like a million mistakes. I've made the same mistakes that I'm trying to offer help for. So I love this creative spark of starting with this fabulous moment in time, right? Put this moment in time on the page and have a great idea. But what do you do between, the moment in time you put on the page and this great idea, this great like pivotal moment when everybody learns everything and the plot gets resolved? What do you do in between there?
Well, right. And there's so many different approaches, of course, to how you have like all the events plotted out. Like if you look at some of the charts, right, that roller coaster
Save
chart.
the cat,
right.
The 3X structure. I mean, yes.
Right. And then we can talk, and we'll probably talk more about beat sheets at some point, probably during the editing process. But basically you have to have tension rising with the events that you're putting, in place that are important to tell your story till you get to that climatic moment where,
yes,
good stuff happens. Right.
Yes.
So I think that there's times where you get lost in that middle. I love my subplots, maybe a little too much. So I sometimes have a lot of other things happening that I feel make the story, more rich. But then in the editing side, I'm like, oh, do these really do enough to keep them in? So I kind of lose traction there too, because I, that's that creative thing. You're like, oh, well, what if this other side character, this is happening, And so when I don't have maybe some of those plot notes I lose my way, and I do like kind of funny things like that sometimes. It makes my editing process then way more fun than it should be. Haha. So
Editing, right? It is fun. We all agree it's fun right now. The one thing though, I think that I learned from making a million mistakes is that you need to start off with your inciting incident.
right.
You're going to have that regardless. In commercial fiction, you're going to have that moment.
Right.
And then you're going to move into a first point of no return. So you have your inciting incident, something
That's
happens,
right.
your main character dives in, takes a journey somewhere, and then there's a change happens. The main character decides to move further with the mystery, if you will. And then you have what they call the fun and games.
That's right.
Describe that, the beats, if you will, the fun and games. And so that's where so many times you get caught up in, oh no, I brought in too many characters. Why did this happen? Why is this affecting my main character? My main character, took a left turn here, and I feel like that he should have taken a right turn. And so you get caught up in that middle section where you have so many different balls in the air that you start dropping them, basically, right?
Right. Right. And then when you go back, you're realizing that you haven't resolved some of those things as you're like rereading, depending upon how you edit, whether you edit right away, maybe when you're, the next day you're looking at what you just wrote. But I think it's a fascinating thing. And I write faster when I've done some plotting.
Yes.
And it's a hard thing for me to assess in a way because I'm getting better at writing the more I write.
The more you write, the better you get. Yes.
Right. So I can't necessarily say that that's the one thing that makes me write faster now. I'm just getting better at writing and kind of organizing.
More efficient, maybe.
Yes. Right. So, but the one book that I wrote the most quickly was that book 3 in my series, and I wrote it in 4 months. Wow. And the kind of outlining I did was not crazy. What I did is I knew that beginning point, I knew the inciting incident, I knew the ending, and I knew some of the elements in the middle. I ended up doing something that I haven't done since then, but it worked very well for me. And I went chapter by chapter, what needed to happen to those characters to get to that endpoint that I was envisioning. And there were some, detours that were those, subplots and things that still allowed that creative spark, that aha, oh, wow, this is perfect kind of thing. But it kept me organized. I'd sit down and go, okay, chapter 23, this is what needs to happen today. Did I, in this chapter, did I do what I was supposed to do with chapter 22? Am I in the right spot now to do this for chapter 23? It was very helpful to me. I was on, I had a mental deadline. I'm in Hub. There's no one, giving me this firm deadline, which is also a bad thing. So that kept me moving. I also, though, have a question for you. So you write, mysteries, and I think that I'm curious, I guess this is my question. I'm curious if you aren't plotting, in-depth plotting, how does that affect mystery writing for you, given all the things that you have to do with clues and red herrings inside a mystery?
Well, thank you for asking. And it's an excellent question because so much can go so wrong with mysteries. Now, my first premise is I think every book's a mystery, right? Not necessarily in terms of solving a crime, but as you move through a novel, something's happening. There are misdirects, perhaps. Somebody is finding more about themselves, which could be the mystery, finding more about a relationship, why it's not working, why it is. So you have that question in probably every novel, arguably. But with mysteries, you really work hard to do different things, right? So your narrator may or may not be reliable. You have to throw in misdirects and red herrings and send your reader off in different directions. And, you have to have bad guys in there and not make them completely, totally awful. You have to give them some kind of motivation for being bad, make them kind of human, hopefully. And so to put all of this into a mystery takes a huge amount of brain power, I think. I mean, maybe my brain power is more limited than everybody else's, but, it just takes a lot of brain power. So remembering all of that, making sure you're bringing in clues at the right time, making sure that you're hitting that black moment, the moment of no return for your main character, and everything makes sense. And you're not ending up with an info dump. Oh, the reason why the bad guy, took out this guy was because of his reason. And then he was connected to that guy. Because that's what happens, right? If you haven't weaved in the clues in the beginning, you're going to info dump in the end. And
right.
so,
And then it's not satisfying for the reader.
And it's not satisfying for the reader.
I mean, we all love that. I love being tricked. I love not knowing. I tend to figure mysteries out. And so an author who can be like, leading me along as the reader, down this path. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's this person, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But there's enough of those clues that when you're, when the mystery's resolved, you go, oh, of course, I should have seen that because of, the thing that happened here in chapter 4 or 8 or whatever. So you have to have enough of that, sprinkled in to satisfy the reader when you get to, the conclusion. But
one thing that I've found, with writing mysteries is the more you do them, the better you get. And plotting helps, but it won't solve everything, because if you're, in the middle of it and you're writing this, story, and all of a sudden a great, twist happens, or maybe, and I know writers who do this, they thought the perpetrator was going to be Susie when the perpetrator turns out to be Johnny, it just made sense for the story, and you couldn't have plotted that. The writer had to be in the moment. They had to go down the path with all the characters and realize, no, making Johnny the bad guy makes more sense than having Susie be the bad person.
Yep.
So, it's just part of the process. One thing I just got finished writing a short story, a novella. Mm-hmm. And wow, is that good training for outlines and plotting, because you have to be so efficient with action and the storyline. It's like a short course in writing.
It is. Yeah. How many words were you given a max word count? I'm sure you were.
We were given a max, and I'm at about 14,000, no more.
I always think that it's harder to write shorter, which is why I hate writing synopses for my books.
We need to do it. We need to, that needs we need like group therapy for writing synopses.
Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. So I think it's a fascinating thing though. Like if you are a novelist and you're used to writing novel length, you've got this like big story arc, and you've got to get where you're going so much faster if you're writing novella length or, something for an anthology. I mean, that's not that many thousand words. And I think that's a funny thing too. So if you're a new writer and you're like listening to us today, I just think that feeling of like a book length work, if you are just starting your writing journey, like that's intimidating. Like, wait, how many 75,000 words?
Yeah.
Like, like you're going to hyperventilate. When you talk to people who are not in the writing world, who all they've ever done is, like essays for school, right? Or compositions, then the concept of writing long like that, but, feels very, very intimidating.
Yes.
And I find that shorter you get, like short stories, when you see like a writing contest submission that's like max 2,000 words.
Those are hard.
That's, to make, an impact and have a satisfying story in that many words. Yes. Yeah. You're right. It's actually really good training for good plotting.
It's training for good plotting. And, as you pace your novel, right? In general, for example, with mysteries, your scenes get shorter as you go toward the end, right? Because there's more action. If your protagonist is solving something and moving quickly through scenes and talking to people, and you want the reader to feel a sense of energy, right? So your scenes are getting shorter as you move forward into those moments. And those are hard to do and they take a lot of your mental energy, I can see I'm doing this in a shorter format, right? And I'm going like, I know why people info dump. They just want to get done. Okay, this happened and then that happened and everybody's happy.
Like no more dialogue. We're just going to throw this all in their narrative and
exactly. We're just
wrap it up.
We're just going to tell you.
Type the end. You're done. Oh, that's funny. So do you think, so you prefer pantsing generally? Yes.
No, I prefer
You're a
plotting. I'm a
reformed.
reformed pantser, so I
Okay.
prefer plot. But at the
Right.
same time, I understand that I don't do a detailed, this day,
Right.
that day, then that, then that. I cannot. I don't have the discipline to do that. And I also have this much of knowledge knowing that when I get into this, if things are going to change. But I do know that I'm going to have an inciting incident. I'm going to have a first point of no return. I'm going to have a second point of no return, and I'll have a denouement. I know those are present. So I have a structure to follow. And that middle point, right, between first point of no return, second point of no return, that's the fun and games. That's where I can play around a little bit. And I don't feel like I'm out on a high wire by myself. I feel like, you know what, I know I have to get from here to here. So what
Right.
needs to happen in the middle? So
That makes sense. Yep. I like that. And I think that generally I appreciate that structure for my own writing too. I'm going to talk about the current work my work in progress. It's this mystery novel, but it has 3 points of view.
Oh.
And it has, I know. So technically I think it's, it's suspense, right? It's suspense because so the reader knows more than the main character. Right. So technically suspense.
Are they all in third person points of view?
No, the main character's first person, past tense. Then we've got 2 third person, past tense, other viewpoints.
Okay, gotcha.
One of the points of view is an alternate timeline.
Yeah.
And so it's a murder mystery. So you get the death from the main character's point of view in the first chapter. From the person who dies, we start 15 years prior and lead up to his death day near the end. So imagine that without actual plotting like documents, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up doing, I used Excel and I did the timelines so that I was having trouble figuring out where to put these other chapters, like how many, there's going to be more of the main character chapters. And then these other chapters are going to come in at the proper intervals, but that's a little tricky too. So where do you put those in? So then I switched to, and I have never done this, index cards.
Okay.
Ever. So I have these 3 storylines actually right now in separate documents.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to
That's a good
decide.
idea.
And then I'm going to use these, to kind of rearrange, which I never thought I was going to be the person buying the packet index cards. Color coded, no doubt here. So, but I think that's going to help me rearrange as I, and basically it's just what's on the index card is the point of view, like who it is.
Yeah.
And then what happens in that chapter real briefly so that we can then, play.
Yes.
So I'll have to empty off my dining table, right? And just, and then keep the cat out of the room, right?
Right.
So I think that there's really not a perfect approach for anybody. Now, if you're writing nonfiction, you're going to be outlining.
You're going to be outlining.
And you will have to, because that's, the whole table of contents and what is going to be in each chapter is part of your book proposal. So if you're writing nonfiction, you don't get a choice. You're going to have to do all of it.
We'll talk about nonfiction next week. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure.
I'm just kidding.
Well, I've done one nonfiction book proposal and it's not my most favorite kind of writing. I like that creative, I like being a little more creative with things.
Yeah.
So I think it's fun. I think there's a lot of different approaches. I would say there's not one right or perfect approach. It's really what works for you as a writer.
It's what works for you and it's what gets you to the end, because the monumental feeling that you have when you have done your best and you can type the end, and you may need to go back and revise, you may need to change things, you may need to do some major, revision, who knows, but having that completed document in your hands, knowing you did it. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what anybody says, writing a novel is one of the most difficult things you can do to get to the end, right? Because there's so many things working against you, your emotions, your time schedule, your other obligations that you may have to do, lack of motivation. I mean, there's just so many things getting in your way to finish this thing. So just being able to finish is fabulous. And then whether you've really, outlined it or you pantsed it, at least you have a place to start to go back and get organized and create a fabulous story.
Right. Right. I mean, in that rough draft or that your initial draft, right, that's like a crazy asset to have.
Yes.
And then you can dive in, right, and
Yes.
double check that you're hitting the plot points in the right
Yes.
spot. The pacing is good, and we're going to cover that. So later on this year, we're going to talk all about editing for plot. You end up editing probably more if you're, on your first or second novel, where if you haven't, gotten a tried and true, formula down for yourself, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I love Lee Child's way to describe it. And it just happens that he and I, I write like he doesn't write like I do. I write like he does. He says he's a slow writer. I'm a slow writer too. And what he does is, he writes whatever, say he writes 6 pages one day, 1,000 words. And then he says, and he leaves that and he goes back in the morning and then he reviews what he wrote. And he calls it churning. He churns.
Churning?
Churning.
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 Churning. Okay.
And he goes, I go back and he goes through what he wrote the day before and he perfects it. And, he goes, I might perfect those pages 20 times. But he goes, before I move forward, then I know I've got a solid 10 pages and I can move forward and write another 10. And he says, so maybe I'm a little considered slow. He said, but that's, somebody who goes through a draft and writes 6 drafts of the book, he goes, it's probably about the same, in terms of speed, right?
Yes.
So he goes through and he calls it churning. And I'm like, that's a very interesting way to describe, editing, if you will.
I like that. And
I do too.
And I think, sometimes we run, like if you can picture just running headlong, into your story.
Yes.
And that typing. So I did, on a side note, did NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is kind of that headlong, don't edit, don't stop. You're going to be doing all of this very quickly. And, that's their premise, that you're not supposed to stop. You just get the words down on the page. But then we'll talk about that after with other people who've done National Novel Writing Month. And you may have to back up a click or two and you have a lot more editing. So that's interesting for him. Lee Child, obviously a very, very successful author, pens incredibly interesting stories.
Right.
So that kind of, that you don't put down once you start, right? You're going to stay up late with his books.
And he works hard at them. Let's face it, he's a storytelling genius,
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating to listen to how he discussed his process. And he's kind of, he doesn't plot. He moves forward with a story. He has moments in his, he has moments to write to. He calls them his North Star. He writes to this North Star and his moment in the book. But he's so skilled at it that he probably doesn't need an outline. For people who are less skilled, I'm like, oh, I could write to the North Star, but I know I need my inciting incident. I know I need my first point of no return. I'm going to have fun and games, and then I'm going to have my second point of no return. I can do that.
I think that's fun. So he's basically, he knows where he's starting, but he knows how that resolution is going to be. Like he knows, like probably
not always, but he gave some examples. Not always, but he has some, very specific. Okay, I know I want this line. I know I want this moment, and he can maneuver his way to it. So
was this a master class or was this just a class?
It was it was a master class.
Yeah, those are really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really if you have never taken one of those master classes that you with really very, very famous authors can be gems.
Yes. And it's, listening to someone describe their process is fascinating. I've always loved biographies. So reading the page is fabulous, but also listening to someone describe their process. It just inspires you as a writer. It gives you knowledge as a writer. It gives you encouragement because you think, okay, if so-and-so can describe this process and I see ways it can help me, I'm going to go use it. So, which we hope, this podcast broadcast, if you will, helps other writers in the same way.
Well, yeah, and that's our whole point, like you were making in the beginning, that we do this because we like helping other writers. We like teaching what we've learned. We've learned from our own mistakes, and also, just having worked through different processes for different reasons, depend upon what we're writing at the time. It's fun to share it. And I think I've always been very pleased with the writing community, particularly here in Wisconsin, and how supportive it is.
Absolutely. Yes.
to share these kind of things. So it's fun. It's fun
always
thing.
fun, and so my advice, if someone were to ask me, how do you write a novel? I would say, study the things I just described, the inciting incident, first point of no return, second point of no return, denouement. And I wrote a blog post. It's on your blog,
Right.
describing that very thing. And then I would just say, start thinking, think that fun and game section, start thinking of moments where your main character might encounter someone, or what they would do, or a silly scene, or a, crazy scene, or an exciting scene. Think about what you'd want to put in those fun and games. And, what is that? Maybe 2 pages of just notes, maybe at the most.
Right. And that's incredibly helpful. Just letting your mind free to just jot all that down, and what you might be able to use for the current book.
Right. And maybe that's all you need in terms of a plot outline. Maybe that's all you need to guide you through this novel that will likely change, but at least it gives you a structure to follow. So you're not feeling like abandoned out on a high wire with no net, and you feel like you can get to the end. You feel like you can write to the end.
So I guess we're not coming down on any specific side of this plotting versus pantsing is, necessarily. Right. Some plotting is good. Leave room for the magic.
Right.
Is that
that's perfect. Some plotting is good, but leave room for the magic. Oh my God, there's the headline. That's perfect.
Woohoo. So this is the part 3 in our series that will run all year. And the next segment is going to be about what the difference is between your hook and the inciting incident. So that can be confused sometimes. So we're going to walk through a bunch of examples in the next segment. So
wonderful.
Thank you. This was fun to do. We were excited to do something that wasn't just all on paper or all on the screen. So we decided to do a little video this time. We'll come back and do this again for other topics inside this plotting series. We appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we are helping you as you work your way through your maybe initial book, maybe not your initial book. So.
Right. Happy writing.